Good day, I'm Donnie Griffin. I'd like to talk for just a few moments about my research paper for English 2161, Early American Literature. I entitled it American Federalism, Alive and Well. The basic premise behind my argument is that American federalism was either assumed or promoted by the authors in their writings that we've studied in early American literature. But you may wonder why I chose such a topic and how it relates to this class. I believe that American culture has abstracted much of American history, including literary history, in such a way as to misappropriate this abstraction upon us as unmitigated and absolute. Much of America believes that their particular perspective is America, while another believes the opposite. In that, they appropriate the founders as well as literary giants such as Emerson as their proof texts of American identity, excluding any other identity as either non-American or anti-American. Wendell Berry wrote in his essay, Out of Your Car, Off Your Horse, abstraction is the enemy wherever it is found. The abstractions of sustainability can ruin the world just as surely as the abstractions of industrial economics. Local life may be as much endangered by those who would save the planet as by those who would conquer the world. For saving the planet calls for abstract purposes and central powers that cannot know, and thus will destroy the integrity of local nature and local community. This is the danger of abstracting American authors or even American cultures. My concern is that by doing so, we're not only losing important pieces of America, we're posing a conundrum that can't be peacefully solved by positing abstract America, whether it be industrial capitalism, social justice, empire, melting pot, conservative or progressive, over and above real American multiculturalism. That sounds like a mountain of molehills unless you consider our own culture here in the Southern Appalachians and how it's slowly amalgamizing into abstraction. It seems to me that it's worth preserving as a distinct and unique culture. Berry's mentor, Andrew Nelson Lytle, was more direct when he put it this way. The educational world began to change its curricula. The chancellor of Vanderbilt University announced at a crucial moment of an agrarian fight that he wanted to graduate bankers, not writers or farmers. It was not the church's Thanksgiving that we chanted. A New England holiday was universally celebrated as the national Thanksgiving. This salvation of the Puritan fathers after their hard winter was instilled into the minds of Southern children as the salvation of their founding fathers. One of my projects in kindergarten was cutting out and painting turkeys and tall-hatted men with bibs to paste in front of a log cabin made out of twigs. At home, I was Red Uncle Remus, but in public, it was John Alden. Why don't you speak for yourself, John? That we were read. We were not told that Captain John Smith, sailing to the Atlantic coast, brought smallpox to the Indians at Plymouth, and so let the Puritans land in safety. Always, it was the New England story which concerned the genesis of a nation. And unless you confuse this literary discussion with mere politics or social studies, I'll quote Lytle's same warning. I'm not talking about statistics, Lytle wrote, but this great acceleration of much widespread loss of farms and families sustains my argument, which is this. At the time we wrote, there were enough families living on the land and enough small town and city privately owned businesses to counterbalance the great industrial might, which was a fact and had to be reckoned with. If our proposal had been listened to, this necessary industry might have been contained, might not have grown into the only idea of the kind of life everyone must be forced to accept. If you've lived in the region surrounding King University for any time, Berry's and Lytle's words should ring true and seem almost prophetic. Almost no one would disagree that our Southern Appalachian culture, with its bluegrass music, folk art, religious heritage, and rural way of life, ought to be preserved. But have you ever wondered why it needs to be? My community is only one of many in America. Each deserve respect, admiration, and preservation. American federalism secures the rights of distinct cultures to exist and flourish on one continent. That's what the authors in my research believe to varying degrees. Americans still operate, however inadvertently, under this same idea. I began by defining my term, American federalism, as the understanding that the American Republic exists as a kind of live and let live system where different cultures or similar belief systems exist in the form of states. Those states agree to live under or together in union, giving authority to a central government to perform only specifically enumerated tasks, leaving the states to provide for the greatest amount of liberty for their people. I believe that the author's distinctive systematic understandings of liberty still exist in various forms and are essential and fundamental to the Republic. The terms I used synonymously with American federalism were self-determination, self-governance, state power, states' rights, and American federalism. It was appropriate to begin with Thomas Jefferson. The usual and contemporary perception of American federalism is Jefferson. His affections are well documented and easily discoverable in our text of the Declaration of Independence. I pointed to his arguments for the right of self-determination and self-governance in the preamble, his list of grievances, and his final argument. Jefferson's perspective was one of federalism. It was a perspective that was essentially local, but articulated by Jefferson as prevailing in the states. Thomas Paine's common sense was my next bit of evidence. Paine's contribution to American lit was at least partially an argument for federalism. I highlighted his argument as one for a specific kind of federalism that highlighted representation coming from, you guessed it, the states. Paine's document was more explicit and direct than Jefferson's, but it was also more centralist. That seems like a tertiary point, except that it curbs any sense that I'm arguing for any specific form of American federalism. Now, I'd admit that Emerson seems like a strange choice to argue for American federalism. His argument is one of assumption, though, and is organic rather than logical. In Emerson's Self-Reliance, he argued for an extreme individualism that resembled today's libertarianism, but it was always in a context. Emerson argued to reject European traditions, but with the understanding that America was the new, better standard. Without that hermeneutical tool, Emerson's context, his argument would seem anarchist. It was not. Self-reliance was not Emerson's magnum opus on American federalism, I'll readily admit, but it can't be abstracted from politics. His argument for the new over the old was one for a very decentralized federalism, and yet another perspective I presented to win your trust and your assent that the writings of these men present at least some form of American federalism. The next premise was that a form of American federalism still exists. It exists in an extremely centralist America in the form of state nullification. The basis for this part of my argument was derived from the articles found in King Library. These articles described an organic movement back toward decentralization in which various people who disagree with federal law have their liberties secured by their own states. Many of these movements that are occurring in the states hold progressive beliefs in high regard. I based my argument for nullification as representative of American federalism on sanctuary policies, decriminalization of marijuana, and pre-nullification of the prohibition of abortion rights. This kind of nullification is distinct of the other two, but just as much American federalism. The specific question surrounding any of these particularly progressive movements isn't whether they are moral or immoral. My concern isn't to debate their morality. Each movement stands as a specimen of American federalism that remains a viable alternative to centralism. It is neither a conservative nor a progressive ideology, and it protects local interests from centralized tyranny. I don't necessarily alliterate each of these points in my argument, partially to continue earning the trust of the reader. Remember, I'm not making this argument from any political perspective other than an inherently American perspective, such as those of Jefferson, Paine, and Emerson. Finally, it is a literary argument that develops into a moral argument, not vice versa. So far, though, my argument is that the authors presented the reader with some form of American federalism. Jefferson's self-governance, Paine's representative state power model, and Emerson's self-determination are distinct American perspectives on federalism. A perspective such as theirs exists in the form of state nullification, represented by sanctuary policies, decriminalization of marijuana, and pre-nullification of federal anti-abortion laws. Finally, though, these are mere premises that lead us to a conclusion. I conclude that a view of American federalism is necessary to provide for and secure the liberty of distinct American communities, such as ours here in the Southern Appalachians. Otherwise, centralization will morph all American cultures into an abstract ideal of what America is. In the beginning of this argument, I present the movement to abolish the Electoral College as a threat to American federalism and to local communities. The Electoral College was set up to protect small, rural communities from larger, more powerful ones. The movement to abolish this protector of American federalism originates from progressives. So, this is a contradiction I pose for the reader to explore in their own mind. It may seem that I'm merely reinforcing my presuppositions. That may be so now, but consider this. I've been around a while. I've marched with teachers as they threatened to strike in the 1980s. I walked the picket line with Teamsters in the 90s. I voted for Democrats, Republicans, constitutional and nonpartisan candidates. I've been progressive, neoconservative, and paleoconservative. I was raised as a fundamentalist Baptist. I left religion for a time and returned to fundamentalism after I got married. I was a church deacon and helped remove a rogue pastor. In the process, I became a Presbyterian. I was a non-confessional Arminian, and now I'm a Reformed Calvinist. My mind is open to change, and I consider myself open to new ideas. But no idea is safe when the majority dictates what ideas are acceptable. For Jefferson's declaration, it was his protest. Paine alliterated it in common sense. It emerged from Emerson's ideology. Americans remain dedicated, however coincidentally, to the idea that cultures have the inherent right to determine for themselves how to live.